Hey everyone, I'm Norm. Welcome to Breaking Back, a tennis podcast by fans, for fans, covering all aspects of the game with an unfiltered lens. And I'm here with my co-hosts, Peter and Chris. Welcome to Breaking Back.
So welcome to Breaking Back, presented by Portland, Maine's Lone Pine Brewing Company and their new Juice Punch Hazy IPA, now available in all distribution markets. Visit lonepinebrewery.com to find it nearby. Juice Punch marries juicy hops with a silky malt to present a hop-heavy, plush and playful punch.
Plush and playful?
Plush and playful punch. That's a lot to get out there, yeah.
Wait, what was the beer?
It's and it is distributed in Southern Florida. It's called Lone Pine Juice Punch Hazy IPA. Nice 6.0 ABV.
It's delicious. We took it here too.
I love it. Unbelievable. We shipped beer over the internet, everybody.
That's right.
All the fun.
Cheers, everyone.
In his illustrious career, John Butler has delivered unparalleled ROI for fans, sponsors, civic partners, and the game of tennis via creative and interactive physical programming on site, on the town, and in communications to fans and brands around the world. From grassroots ATP Challenger Tour events to top-level ATP Tour spectacles like the Delray Beach Open, which John ran for more than 3 decades, to the charm of ATP Champions Tour Legends matches, John has continually innovated to cross-market and grow the game's appeal. Welcome, John Butler.
Wow, that was fantastic. The crowd goes crazy. Wow. Sometimes I think we all need a little reminder. As you're saying that, I'm going, wow, you know what? I should really read my LinkedIn page more. I've done a couple of things. Yeah, no, good stuff. Thank you. This is great. No, glad to have the mutual friends that we do. Want to thank Mike Aronson for putting us together, our local partner in crime between you guys up there in the Northeast and me down here.
Maybe talk a little bit about how you know Mikey and when you guys.
Mike is one of those guys. I mean, I'm sure you know. As soon as you meet him, you're like, I think I've known this guy my whole life, even though I was just introduced to him. So easy, much fun to hang around. Passionate about his tennis, about his golf, sports in general. You know, his dude Sundays. It off from meeting him in Delray when he started coming to the tournament, and of course with his relationship so many years with New Balance. Being a runner, and New Balance has always been a big part of the running scene. And then they jumped in on tennis more. And it was just one of those relationships that was just incredibly natural the first time you met the guy. What a house he's got. You got to love that place.
He has a beautiful house on the Intercoastal Waterway with a beautiful tennis court. And it's magnificent. I'm not sure how much he actually plays on it because he's over at the DTC, but.
Yeah, no, he's good people.
First question would be from someone who truly appreciates the entire process of organizing a sporting event from start to finish and all year round, by the way, just sort of a misnomer. People who think, a tennis tournament, you just work for a couple weeks a year and then
we show up with tennis balls and go.
Roll them out there.
All the heavy lifting is probably done during the other 11 and a half months. Let us know what it was like to run the Delray Beach Open for, I guess, almost right at 32 years.
No, you can't pay enough for the experience, honestly. When we all jumped into it at the very beginning, it was a friend's father who started the event, and it was just a challenger at the time. He had run big junior tournaments. He had retired from his regular work, and his family was very invested in tennis. His 2 sons were a couple of my really, really good friends growing up, went to high school together, played against each other in the juniors. And he immediately recognized that even though he'd run the biggest junior tournaments in the world, it was a far different experience running even a challenger level tournament. I was playing college tennis at the time. He's like, hey, can you help me out and do this? Work with me a little bit. And that's how the whole thing started 32 years ago. And to be able to do what we do now, but to think about doing it back then, there's just no way. It would have been completely overwhelming. The natural history, the natural ebbs and flows, the successes, the failures, it's the only way that you get to grow because there's just so much that goes into it. Not only it is really difficult, but the amount of detail, the amount of organization, time management, people management, really getting people to buy into your program, what you're looking to deliver as an end result, creating those paths to get there. I mean, that's what really makes it so special. I mean, it takes more than a year to do an event. Each year we were planning 2 and 3 years in advance because there was always just so much going on, so much that we wanted to do that was just impossible to facilitate in the 12 months. plus do all the other work that we did with the junior tournaments, international events, USTA national championships, ITF junior tournaments, the marketing and PR media work we did for brands that were trying to establish themselves within tennis. We were nonstop.
Did the manpower or your staff grow significantly over those 32 years, John?
It did, especially once we started bringing interns and ticket salespeople into the event. You would bump up your core crew. We had about probably like 5 core people that would be year round. Then we would add another 5 interns. And of course, come showtime, you have a tournament family that's 600-700 people between volunteers and ball kids and TV, media, operations. I mean, it explodes tremendously. But you had about 5 or 6 core people that would work the event year round. So enough to manage it and keep it all going the direction that we wanted.
What were some of the most notable significant changes that you noticed or you experienced over those 32 years? For example, it looks like you put towards the end of your tenure, the seats on court, which looked to be super cool, like a great experience. What things like did you experience over the years?
We were known to be pretty innovative. And it was thanks very much largely to our owner and tournament director, Mark Barron, he was the singular owner of the event. So if you ever wanted to do anything, you simply walked across the office, pitched it to him, and 9 times out of 10, he was good with it because he liked to be progressive. Because, being a 250 event, it's hard to kind of stand out. You've got the thousands who have the millions and millions behind them, all the top athletes playing the sport. You trickle down to 250. If you're going to be something special, newsworthy in and outside of tennis, you had to do some things that were creative. So we really pushed the envelope in a lot of ways. And I love that one that you hit on there. We worked with the ATP Tour, promoted that idea to them probably 3 years before they actually let us do it and sell seats because they didn't understand how it was going to work. How are people going to get on the court? Is it dangerous? What's going to happen? So we did it a couple of years on a trial basis before they finally gave us the okay to do it because it's different than sitting courtside in basketball. We call them the best seats in the house, and they were literally on-court seats where you'd walk on just like you were a player. You were part of the show. Yeah. You weren't watching it. You were part of the show. And we actually even had people who had courtside Miami Heat seat tickets. They came down there. They watched one point. They ran back to the box office and bought the seats for the week. I mean, it was a special experience because unlike basketball, you've got a ball traveling 100 to 150 miles an hour, only a few feet from your face. And especially if you're in the corner seats and you've got, people serving out wide, you didn't want to be caught dilly-dallying on your phone. I mean, you had to sign waivers because you were in the line of fire, but it was an experience like you just couldn't get anywhere else. And those were sorts of the way that we thought, the way that we built the tournament that the ATP Tour really appreciated. And they told other events, do more of that, do more of that. We were the first tournament to have the Volley Girls promo team. That was one of the biggest hits that we've ever done because the Volley Girls became the face of the tournament year round in the community. You can only get the players to do so much. The Volley Girls became this unbelievable hit because they were kind, they were sweet, they did dance routines, sponsors started hiring them when they were doing new openings or events. So the more that we were able to create interactions with people that necessarily weren't tennis fans, but it was something that they remembered in connection with the tennis tournament, it became a big, big win for us and also for the sport.
John, you mentioned the ATP and kind of their taking a conservative approach is letting you put people on the court, for example. How did you get the tournament started? What's that process like to actually go from concept to, an ATP Tour event?
We were a challenger the first 2 years in Pembroke Pines, $75,000 plus hospitality challenger. And we purposely built that and ran it like it was a full-blown tour event in the hopes of being able to actually have an actual tour event. And the reason that came about back then was a tournament. I forget what country it was in, but it was undergoing some sort of, internal turmoil and they weren't able to host the tournament anymore. So the option came to be able to fill that. And we applied for that. And based on what we were able to achieve and put together as a challenger event, they were able to elevate us to the next level. So that's the way it worked for us. These days, you can't buy an event. You can't get into an event. They're actually trying to reduce the number of tournaments on tour in order so that each event is more valuable. And there's already just too many players, tournaments happening as it is right now. Tennis is best served right now by a form of contraction and expansion. So the days of being able to buy into it are even gone. So right now, if something comes up where that's why you see tournaments being bought by other entities, that's why you're seeing PIF getting involved and wanting to be in the sport and billionaire investment with guys like Ben Navarro, which is fantastic to see what he's come in and done with the WTA event in Charleston and the Cincinnati 1000. I mean, when you start having people like that getting involved in tennis, you're going to start trending well, even though I know there's a few things happening in the game right now that I'm sure we'll address
on the Delray tournament specifically, but since you brought up what's happening in tennis at the macro level, I'm very curious to get your thoughts on the impact to a Delray Beach or to the other small 250s, even 500s. It seems like it's necessary, right, for growth to have that significant injection of cash. But what does that mean, or what do you think the future is for the events that you've managed for so long?
One of the reasons that I left at the end of 2022 was just that I did see the kind of ceiling that tennis had hit. And it was really troubling to me because, like you guys, I'm still a tennis geek at heart. And when I see, just the fact that tennis professionally as a product was going nowhere, it bothered me. So, I knew that there was more out there. I literally took some time off and I wrote a white paper. It's called Professional Tennis League. And I started circulating it at the beginning of 2023. And a lot of what you're seeing out there now, I believe, is from that white paper, because there are certain parts of what everybody is talking about that aren't new news, like the fact that men and women have to aggregate and be one tennis. That's not new news. It's got to happen, because the sport right now isn't nimble. You have 7 different entities all doing what they want to do to, for the best interest of their boards and investors and all that. So it's not a nimble sport like the NFL, NBA, or any of these other sports that are all one entity and they can do whatever they want. So part of Professional Tennis League, when I looked at it, is, of course, the aggregation of men and women, but then also the most key element to me, and this is going to drive to what your question is about what happens with these other tournaments. It really has to come down to what are we looking at that's going to be the healthiest for the sport in the long term? What is going to create the most investable value? And professional sports is entertainment. It's not meant to be the next stage of an athlete's life, regardless of how good he is as an athlete. It is built as entertainment. So I believe that tennis needs to be and put forth its absolute premier product. And in order to have your premier product continuously for years to come, the number one objective is athlete development. Every sport that is highly monetized, highly successful, focuses on athlete development. You look at NBA, NFL, they take care of these athletes from college and juniors all the way up until they are the best that they can be throughout their career. They're feeding, nutrition, coaching, diet, mental training, fitness. I mean, you name it. They are actively involved. They are owning the pipeline. They are managing it, because this athlete is going to sell more jerseys with his names. He's going to sell more media rights. He's going to break open new markets that we haven't hit yet. He's going to be a media darling. Tennis doesn't do that. They just tell the athletes, here are the rankings, here are the tournaments, go get it, fellas. We'll see you when you get to the top. How many make it to the top, let alone, how many make it so they can afford a house? So it's a really broken system. And that's not news. But I think addressing the fact that tennis needs to come to the table and provide for their athletes the way other sports do, I think that's number one, athlete development. And of course, with that, there's a cost. So how do you fund it? Right now, I believe that we are doing a very big disservice to the sport, the way that we package and promote the sport. That's why Professional Tennis League is based on a 3-tier system where your top tier is your premier product. In my version, it's top 50 men, top 56 women playing 10 to 14 events plus the 4 majors, highly produced. For example, when you're watching Formula One or you're watching other sports, the level of connection that they're able to create between the viewer and what's actually happening live is unbelievable. If you watch tennis, right, you're watching Miami Open this week, aside from maybe electronic line calling and HD, you're looking at the same thing that if I showed you a McEnroe Connors match from the 80s. It's like there really isn't doing anything to make people, if you're new to the sport, go, oh my God, that was insane. Holy cow. They just don't soak up it. So you put your top players, men and women, in a highly immersive, highly performance-driven package for broadcast and streaming, and you've got your top-tier product. Of course, there's a heck of a lot more to it, but your 10 to 15 events, the majors, highly produced, and then that way you also have consistency. You have these same 56 players, people can follow it from week to week to week, versus Tennis Channel we watch here in the US. You've got this group of players playing one week, the next week you've got another group of players, but what happened to those guys? A couple of them appear weeks later. It's like, how do you follow it?
It's so fractured. I mean, I have people call me every week, like, where's a tournament this week? Or, Sinner's playing in Paraguay, Alcaraz is playing in, Europe. I mean, it's crazy, right? When you think about it, or put that
Well,
up
and
against
think
other
about it. I'll mention F1 a lot because the way that they package the sport is fantastic. It's super easy. I mean, it's an incredibly technical sport, but what they do for the fans they make it amazingly easy to consume. So that every week when you turn on Formula One, you're going to see Max, you're going to see Lewis, you're going to see Checo, you're going to see Norris. Hands down, it's not going to be these guys, I'm going to play this event, I'm going to play that event, I'm going to skip this one. No, as a sponsor, as a broadcaster, you're getting premium product produced in a premium way every single show, period. That's what it is. And that's where I think tennis can do better. And again, this isn't a fault-finding thing. Right now in tennis, we are victims of just how everybody has tried to Band-Aid, over the past several decades. And I think if everybody went back to a whiteboard, what you're seeing now is what I've done with Professional Tennis League. When you're talking about the Grand Slams and the Premier Tour, you're talking about ATP and the Saudis want to do. They're all talking about something very similar, but I think I've been able to push that for more than a year now. But I think also that it comes down for me, athlete development, because the more of these incredible athletes that we can bring through the pipeline, the better and the healthier the sport will be. We can take control of it.
Yeah, I was watching Monfils and Alcaraz last night, and just the joy that those guys have when they play tennis, and they're high-fiving each other, they're pushing themselves to the limit, trying trick shots. I mean, that's what it's all about. Like, those guys get it. There is an entertainment aspect to it, and you've got to keep the fan coming back. I mean, just the idea of like trying to go to a big event. Say I want to go to Wimbledon, you've got to invest all this money. You have no idea who's going to be there, who's going to be hurt, who's going to be in the event, who's going to be left by the time you get there. It's a crapshoot, literally a crapshoot. So anything they can do to kind of, to tighten that and guarantee some players on certain days, I think would be helpful.
It goes back to the point where creating the value for the sport. So that's why you have that tier 1 premium product, and then you have tiers 2 and 3 that are more based on development and innovation, where you have the ability to really test out new interactions for fans, for players, for sponsors, how you test new technical aspects of the game and of promotion of the sport, and use that as kind of like an area where you can model and see what works, and then bring that to the big stage. And then that's also where you have, say, for example, tier 2 is players 57 through 112. By the way, when I came up with these 3-tiered system, the way I looked at it was I actually analyzed how many players were playing professional tennis on a given week between the main tour and the challenger level. It's about 300 to 350 players who are playing at that level. So that's where the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 all comes down to, adds up providing jobs for about 300 people. Now, of course, there's more men playing each week than there are women, but the whole idea behind this is the equality between the men and the women with the number of playing, the jobs, the prize money. Because, right now also, I think that a couple of people who you're not seeing come to the table in this whole thing that's going out there are the most powerful people in the game right now. I don't see the players coming to the table going, this is what we want as players. And whoever can provide this, that's the tour that we're going to play. Like, imagine if the players unionized, if they had a proper union, there's PTPA out there, they're doing the best that they can by making tour life a better, more livable experience for the players. But what if there really was like an NFLPA for the players? Imagine the weight and the power there. The slams and all the tournaments would be shaking, because then they'd be like, oh God, now what? The players have the power, and I haven't seen them really gather and harness their strength. Say, guys, this is what we want. We're the ones who are playing. I can tell you that we need a week off between events, longer off season, this change in the format, whatever. Instead, it's like they're being dictated to.
I thought it was the contrast between Indian Wells and, which every player absolutely adores, right? Playing that event, the conditions, the treatment, all the perks. And then last week, Ruud, who, from what I know, I don't know the guy, but like from what you can see, looks like the nicest guy on tour. And he's freaking out because he's telling the chair umpire he's got to go back to a trailer with plastic chairs and no chilled water. So how do you have two 1,000 events that are a week apart? So talk about disparity, right? They should have had a Lone Pine or a cooler of them. Yeah. It makes you stop and think, like, there's all these different tours, all these competing interests. How can you possibly deliver a singular experience? And this is something we talk about all the time. Peter in particular, with his Peter, you're so well versed in Premier League and F1 and what the structure that those guys have and their success.
Well, the F1 analogy, John, hits close to home ever since Drive to Survive, the Netflix series. My better half now, as we've talked about in previous episodes, literally knows every outfit every driver wears before every race and after every race and every nuance to the sport, which is crazy for someone who's never watched a single lap of racing her entire life. But your point hits close to home as far as the production value of the F1 races makes it so easy to watch, and the connection between the viewer and the driver with the constant on in-car cameras and recordings and conversations between the team owner and the driver is just, it's incredible what F1's doing. And I'd like to see that apply to tennis. I did see a little bit of the on-court cameras during the US Open last summer when some of the American players were warming up and practicing, and they have the wireless, mic, and they're talking, which I don't know how they do it, but they're talking as they're warming up and playing. And so they're sort of, I think tennis is trying to sort of bridge the gap and create a better connection. I think Kyrgios is doing a great job of that, in my opinion. But your analogy hits close to home as far as connecting fans to the players more seamlessly, which will increase eyeballs and TV ratings and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. They do a phenomenal job. And, so does Premier League, the way that they've come to the American market. Now, what you're watching on TV really doesn't, it's not that dynamic, but how they've come to the American market where they do, is at the Premier League mornings where they'll come to a particular city and state in the United States and they'll do a big viewing and watch party. That's super good fun, But other sports are stepping out of their comfort zone. Look at what cricket has done with T20. Now you have the T20 World Cup coming to the United States this year, with matches in New York and with matches here in Florida. You're going to have the Rugby World Cup coming in 2027, 2030, I think is what it is, both men's and women. These other sports are creating formats and adapting in ways that are going to be more desirable and interesting to new markets. Baseball, look how they've sped up the game. They've had some of the best couple of years that they've had pretty much ever. So it's about progression, keeping this from I really don't want to see tennis changing its scoring format or doing anything drastic like that. But I believe that there can be a much better presentation, packaging, and concept and production. I believe it can be, we're the top of the food chain when it comes to sports that command the biggest dollars for media rights and for sponsorships, commercial properties. It's there. It's ripe. We've got men and women, incredibly sexy athletes. We have billionaire investment in the sport. It's one of the only global tours in the entire world, playing in some of the most dynamic cities ever. I mean, what sport boasts that? And what are we doing with it? And I think tennis is kind of getting its comeuppance because the people that are currently running it are kind of almost being driven to the side by people who see what the sport can really be. And so now it's like playing catch up.
Yeah. We talked earlier, I think in our first episode, John, about how tennis in the early 80s was more important or more popular in rating standpoint than the PGA and the NBA, which I think is hard to even fathom at this point, right? But you mentioned Nick Kyrgios, Peter, and we've been kind of fawning over his unbelievable on-air work in the Australian Open and how interesting it was. A couple of years ago, John, I was down there watching the Delray Open, and he had withdrawn from the event, but he was also playing basketball in the gym on the campus. And so I'm just curious, when that kind of thing happens, how do you handle that? And I'm sure you have other examples and maybe you want to anonymize them, but in that particular case, what are you doing to remedy the fans who are freaking out?
That happened a couple of times with him. It's you're damned if you do, damned if you don't when it comes to booking him and having him in the event. But yeah, that was also the same day that he withdrew, and the same day that he was actually practicing with Jack Sock. And if you were watching their practice session, it was you couldn't keep your eye on the ball. It was moving such speeds and such pace of what these two dudes were doing with the tennis ball was insane. And 30 minutes later, we get a note that he's pulling out. What? The guy was just hitting the ball like a dream out there. And then another 30 minutes later, he is going hardcore 3-on-3, driving, playing basketball. And he's really good at basketball. I don't know if you've ever seen him.
I've seen some.
So you're watching him and you're I'm just praying that nobody is shooting video and sending this out. And it does happen, and then fans get pissed off, and you understand it. But at the same time, it's what do we do? And so the ATP, they'll go and talk to him, but whatever. It's not like he's going to be bothered by anything anybody is going to say. He's like NASCAR. Everybody goes for the crash.
I remember that year, all the marketing, all the signage around Atlantic Ave, all how it featured Kyrgios. I was like, man, somebody's pulling their hair out somewhere. And it was you, probably. See what happened. Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. You can expect it. And again, it also comes back to the schedule. I mean, these guys are playing so much tennis. And that's why with Professional Tennis League, the calendar that I put together has a week off between events. It has a mid-season break and a longer off season. And if you're in the semis of the tournament, you get a bye the following week, regardless of what your ranking is. So that kind of helps you when it comes to the parity of, the number of matches and games that you're playing and the amount of wear and tear on your body.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the stat because we were wondering at what level are you not making any money, or are you not breaking even in tennis? In the most recent Matt Futterman article on the Atlantic, it said 80 and above are the only people who are breaking even, let alone making money.
Well, there's more to it than that. I can tell you that the end of 2022, the last time I did full-blown research, the number 100 player made 610,000 gross. So you subtract expenses from that, and expenses for a player are easily six figures. For a guy who's that level, it could be 300, it could be half of what he's made. So he's, maybe netting 300, 400 when you compare that to other sports, which is not really fair to do, but in a sense that it is, because you brought up a really good point compared to the NBA. Back in the 80s, tennis was more popular than the NBA. But now look at what the NBA has done since then to create what I like to call investable value. The amount of money, the amount of investment that they've caused in their sport because of what they've done, how they've built it, how they've packaged it and promoted it, compared to what tennis has done. It's two different worlds. Back then, you couldn't ask for a better cast of characters between McEnroe and Connors and Borg and these people that were just so different and unique and special. And at night, they were at Studio 54, and the next day they were playing tennis and beating each other's brains, had personalities and charm. Now, an athlete in any sport really can't veer from training and being consumed by his sport for an hour because somebody else is going to be consumed that hour. I think that all happened, once Yvonne Lundell hit the tour, and he wasn't the most talented, but God, that guy, his level of fitness and his level of professionalism, all of a sudden guys were like, damn it, I'm way more talented, but I can't beat you. We're going to 5 sets and you're hitting as hard as you did in the first game.
Oh, yeah. John, we love the stat that tennis has the shortest off season of all the major sports with a mere 34 days. The second shortest off season is actually the NHL with 118 days off. And then you have Major League Baseball with 178, the NBA with 197, and the NFL with 241 days off. A month off.
Anybody who's played tennis knows if you play club tennis, and I've actually finally gotten back into hitting some balls again. I'm going to try to play some tournaments, for the men's, elders, senior, super old division. And I get out there and last week I played probably 3 or 4 days. At the end of that 1 week, I'm like, I need a month off.
Yeah,
I was absolutely fine. Oh my God, what these guys are doing out there is just insane. I mean, I really do think they're the best athletes in the world. I mean, if anybody has tried to hit a serve at them coming 120, 140 miles an hour, it's not like you're trying to hit it out of a ballpark. You've got to hit it back into a confined space and then be ready for the next shot that's coming at you in half of a second. It's like speed, endurance, chest, it's everything all in the blink of an eye. And that's why people love those seats that were on the court, because you really understood what these guys are doing. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, during the Netflix Slam, I went to the event with my son because we just had to get, we wanted, the bucket list was seeing Nadal play, and that was one way of guaranteeing we would be able to do that. But the camera angles, I went back and watched the match afterward that night. The camera work was incredible because they actually had it behind the baseline where at the player level, you could see the ball move and spin. And that's what people don't see unless you go to a live event.
I mean, it's amazing when you realize how high that ball is traveling over the net and still maintaining the speed that it is. The net clearance is unreal. And when you see what the curvature and what the court coverage that these guys are able to produce and execute. And again, that's why I think it's so important for people to see more of that, because when you look at that, you're thinking, oh my goodness, wow, that's special.
Yeah. I think web distribution, and I don't know about you or your thoughts on gambling on tennis, but I think, hey, it's legal. People are doing it. There's a huge audience for that. Put it all together in one package so you can see it on the screen.
Take it in, manage it, own it, operate it, make it your friend, bring in that money, because the more money these guys are being paid, the less likely they are to be provoked by somebody who's going to say, hey, can you give a few games here and there? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a huge part of it. Both gambling, tennis is already the number one sport in the world bet on point by point. There's so many other ways to bet on tennis, where there's, just all the basic stuff. There's just a million different ways that are really fun to bet in tennis. So with fantasy gaming, that was also a big part of Professional Tennis League, is that if you have 3 different tiers of 56 composed players, in each one 56 men, 56 women, tier 1, 56 men, 6 women tier 2, and I think tier 3 is a little bit more. But if you know who is playing in each of those tiers for the season, now you can have legitimate fantasy gaming like you have fantasy football. You can get together with your buddies and you can say, okay, your turn. I'm going to pick this guy, because you know that he's playing every single tournament.
They're going to be there.
And the really cool part of it is that you can also design it so that you're not just picking a team that's players based in tier 1. You can make it so that you have to pick, say, 3 players in tier 1, 3 players in tier 2, 3 players in tier 3. So that way you're also getting to know these other players who are coming up in the pipeline. It's like in fantasy football when you have to hit the waiver wire, when all of a sudden you have to do research and you're finding out what's going on. Is this guy getting lucky? Is he an up-and-comer? So now you start learning about these other players who are coming up. So it kind of educates you more in the game. You're more well-versed in the game. Absolutely agree with you. Fantasy game, betting, big.
I think the talent too is such that, right, they're beautiful people. They're incredible specimens. They're interesting, right? And you want to get to know them. And in tennis, you can get to know them. You see like exactly what they're feeling at all times. And so if you could do something in between the shows, like I liked Breakpoint and what it was trying to do, but it was too dated, right? Anybody who followed the sport, it was not interesting at all because the stories were a year old. But if you could do that in between and help build the narrative in between these different tournaments, then you're not only following the events, you're following the drama that is unfolding, week to week and event to event. And I think that adds incredible.
I don't know if you realize how big that is. That is number one priority in making connections between a sport or athletes and the fan base is storyline. There's nothing more important. And if you have the ability to connect athletes with fans and brands, that's enormous. And if you have these athletes playing these tiers the whole season, you know that you can build storylines. You know that you can build content as a broadcast partner, as a streaming partner, and be ready for that and carry that through the season. Right now, you can't do that as efficiently as you would knowing exactly who's playing these tournaments all year long. So being able to build storyline is a big part of professional tennis league. And they do that in Formula One, right, Peter? I mean, these storylines that you get from week to week and what they do with the pre-show during the show, it's magnificent.
And it lights up social media, right? It's all about content, right? Our last guest was this guy, Eric Smallwood, from a marketing firm that calculates and matches brands to players and captures the data to justify, their investment. It's such a sticky connection when you can associate a brand with a player.
Absolutely crucial.
Let's pivot into the Premier Tour. And John, let us know your thoughts on what the status is of the proposal here, or what's on the table with the UST-led design versus the Saudis' public investment fund and production. What are your thoughts there?
Well, when I put together Professional Tennis League, it was basically, okay, here's this new concept tour. Now, how does it come into play? How is it going to be executed? And I came together with a few different options. There could be the live type model where it's a complete new renegade tour, which is the easiest and cleanest. But you know what? What I don't like about that is that it loses all connection to the beautiful history of tennis. So I don't really want to see something drastic. Tennis has such an amazing history when it comes to the personalities, the fashion. So the one that I liked the most that I came up with was literally, I thought, well, you know what? The Slams can take this over and have the ownership of it because they already have the 4 biggest pinnacles in the sport. So it would make sense that, okay, let's have another branch that operates the year-round tour. That because they would seem to have wherewithal when it comes to being able to have staffing or produce staff and being able to produce funding. I am a fan of heavy Grand Slam participation. I just think it makes sense to keep it all under the tennis umbrella. But again, it just has to be worked out so that the economics are fair for the tournaments, for the players. The way that I had worked it out is, say, for example, if you have 10 to 15 premier events, then you have 10 to 15 tier 2 events. And again, this is like me using a whiteboard, like I was starting the tour from scratch, not taking into consideration anything, anybody, hurting anybody, helping anybody. What made the most sense to me was like basketball. In the NBA, every team owns and operates their own G League team. Imagine if you applied that to tennis. Every owner of a tier 1 premier event, you also have a tier 2 event. So therefore, people are going to get tournaments and tournament owners, some will get hurt. I mean, in the model, the way that it is now, if you had to then apply it to the real world, I don't know how to not do that. But if you're looking at a whiteboard, looking at the best best history, potential, health, future of the game. That's the way that I'm analyzing this, not trying, because tennis for years has had too many Band-Aids. Now, I mean, how many different athletes is tennis trying to take care of? How many different, I mean, there's 60 ATP tournaments alone. And I don't know how many different events. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. The sport isn't nimble enough as it needs to be to create value. There's just too much going on.
Yeah. Peter, you can certainly speak to the impact the G League has had on the NBA and their investment in it.
Yeah, I worked 5 years, John, for the Maine Celtics up here in Portland, the G League team for the Boston Celtics. And I tell you, there is the smallest difference in talent, gap in talent from the NBA to the G League. Literally, I think you could swap out the last 2-3 seats on a 12-seat NBA bench for the first 2 or 3 seats on a G League bench. And it's created a much better league, and the talent level and the entertainment value in the G League is pretty incredible. I'm just thinking about what it would be like to have a tier 1 and a tier 2 tournament. It just means you're invested in the next level and you're creating more of sort of a seamless transition.
Since day one, the way that I position players playing each one is at the end of each season, there's promotion and relegation. So you have a certain number of people that move down from tier 1 into tier 2, up from tier 2 to tier 1. Some of them are, they're going to be so close to the limits that that they're going to move no matter what. But then you can also have what I call a season-ending moving event for those who are kind of on the bubble. And think about the entertainment value and the tension and the drama of that event, because you're so close to staying or going in this event that you're going to play. The bottom of tier 1 playing against the top from tier 2. Who's going to stay? Who's going to go? Oh, it'd be unbelievable. You want to talk about a product that would be incredible for TV, streaming, betting. The storylines there would be out of this world. The tension would be off the charts, just like European soccer.
It'd be fascinating if any sport in the U.S. could somehow incorporate promotion and relegation, because what it does in the Premier League to the championship. So, for example, the top 3 teams in the championship in England, which is the second tier division, the top 6 teams actually play in a tournament to see which 3 teams are going to get promoted. There's 2 teams that end up playing in a 1-game play-in in Wembley. And it's something like a $200 million game, because those 2 teams that get promoted will inherit $200 million just in TV revenue from playing in the Premier League. And then conversely, there's teams that get relegated in the bottom of the Premier League whose ownership and fan base are jumping off bridges, because once you get relegated, there's no promise that you're ever going to get back up into the big leagues. I love the concept.
It's about earning it. You have to earn it. It's a fantastic model. I'm a big believer, and I say this a lot, and we can go pretty deep here. Like, I think tennis is the most incredible and dynamic sport in the world. There's no sport that mirrors real life like tennis. And that's why I think it's especially important for young people, because if a young person can learn to compete in tennis, take the wins, the losses, the coaching, reapply that to his next match, figure some things out, I believe that experience growing up will really be able to make more efficient and practical young people, young adults, people who are able to walk into a boardroom and present and conquer compared to other sports, because tennis is so individual. You can have the greatest coaches in the world. Once you close the gate and walk on the court, you have to execute. Same as when you walk in to make a presentation for a bid, a job, you walk in there, it's on you. I don't care what happened before that. So it's just such a special sport outside of just the wins and losses on a court, what it can do for a person as they mature. We can get great global peace.
I like it. Peace through tennis. Yeah, I hope they can get this figured out, because the Davis Cup was always such a great event, and now it's just another event. You don't even know when it is, what it is, why it matters, does it matter? There's so much content. Someone's just got to put it together. But as you said a while ago, the players have to get behind it because they are the product. And I wonder how they end up deciding where they're going to go. My guess it would be, money would be very convincing, as it usually is.
Well, here's the thing, though, too. I mean, I've been in touch with, when I tell you I've been talking to people, I mean, I've been talking to the higher ups. And when I say the higher ups, I mean the decision makers at WTA, ATP, the majors, PTPA. For over a year now, they've had professional tennis in their hands. And I really do think that's why you see a lot of this out there right now. And I've shared with them, it doesn't have to be Saudi money. I know it's a low-hanging fruit, but Saudi, if you look at the list of the top 10 sovereign wealth funds, I don't even know if it's top 5. Not to say that these other ones above it would be hands-on for sure. Let me jump into tennis. But, you look at the Mubadala Fund, which is the Abu Dhabi fund, who has expressed interest in being the go-to for everything and all things tennis. They have a much different human rights.
Right. Much more
You
Western.
have these pension funds now that are all buying into sports, that it's legal now. I mean, what was that? I looked at, there was something, God, I think there's like 20 pension funds around the world that have something like over $20 billion in assets, or something like astronomical number. Like, I couldn't believe this. We're talking like teacher pension funds that have billions and billions of dollars. And the way that leagues are operating now, they're starting to allow these sorts of investments. I did a whole list on where these other funding opportunities could come from, shared that with Harris, but the opportunity is out there. And what the Premier Tour is talking about is they're talking about not even needing outside investment, just doing this on their own. A huge player in this that seems to be kind of sitting back is WTA. I mean, I think they have way more power than anyone realizes, because women's sports has never been more popular. Look at what's going on right now with the Women's March Madness last year, what's going on with women's amateur soccer, professional soccer, junior sports. It's outrageous the amount of investment being made out there. And you look at the tournaments that men make the most money at, it's combined tournaments. So why aren't the men and the ATP going to say, let's do everything we can, because we know that the combined tennis product is where I make the most money. It's what fans want to see the most. So I think WTA has a lot of power in this right now. The players and the WTA are the kind of ones that are under the radar that could drive this.
What's your role going forward in this? Like, do you have a seat at the table, or what would you like to do as this gets decided, or the next era of tennis is defined?
It's really just finding people who have the strengths that I don't. I can't go to the table and say, all right, John Butler is going to start professional tennis league. Everyone in? So it's going to come to working with, whether it be Craig Tiley, who really kind of kicked things off for the Premier Tour. Really innovative guy. I think what he and Tennis Australia have done for the sport, the way that they package and present, nobody can touch it. It's unbelievable what Tennis Australia does and what Craig Tiley does. So I know that he and Lucia have been kind of the most vocal about the Premier Tour with the Saudi move and what the ATP is doing. I mean, that still is two independent tours. It's still ATP, WTA. Again, we're still stuck where we're going to be. It's probably very good for the ATP, which is what Gaudenzi has been all about, which is good for ATP, but again, not the best for the long-term health of the sport. It's finding the people who I really think are going to come through with what and where tennis needs to go, and being in a ballpark with them. That's the goal. I've been doing this now for over a year. I put this whole thing together. And like I said, I think a lot of what you're seeing out there stems from what I've been pushing with the power. So obviously, I believe my head is in the right place. And, what I've shared and discussed is only the beginning, because for me, it all goes down to the grassroots of the game. It's all about how do we make this game more interesting and desirable to children. Because right now, if you put 20 different sports in front of kids and you watch a kid buy it, I think they're probably going to choose tennis last, because it's just so isolating. So I really believe that there's a way that it can be taught as a team sport where you're playing with all your friends, you, Peter, me, Mike Aronson, we're kids, we're getting together, we're part of this tennis academy, and we're not all learning individually, we're learning about tennis, and we can all tell each other what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. We can go to tournaments and scout and for each other and be like, okay, Norm, I saw this guy you're playing, he's a little weak here, this is what you can do, because you are learning tennis. You're not just learning how to hit a ball, you're learning the sport and the game and how you can, as a team, help each other. So I like that approach, because then it becomes truly something that you can do with your buds.
I've always thought it was interesting because I played USTA leagues and whatnot and here and there. And I just love the spirit. I'm not sure. I have some issues with how they execute, but I love the spirit of being on a team and competing as a team, hanging out afterward. And if you can get that turned on, as you suggest, like get kids doing that at a team level early, which the USTA has tried, like kind of like 18 and under, but they've got to take the individual aspect, which is so brilliant, but also makes it very tough to achieve. You've got to have success. Winning or losing as a team makes it much more joyful to play.
It all goes back to that pipeline. I have a saying, it's about creating investable value and a healthy pipeline for all things fueling value. When you consider all things fueling value, that has to start at the grassroots with kids who can participate, enjoy, retain, share their love, bring in their buddies, come through the system, play, grow as an athlete, grow as a person. The sport takes you in, helps bring you to be the best that you can be if you are deserving or if you're capable of being that sort of a player. And then you matriculate on to professional, or you go on into your commercial world. Global peace.
Global peace achieved through tennis and Lone Pine.
Lone Pine.
Well, John, this has been incredible. I mean, we could go on for hours. Like, I'd love to talk about college tennis and juniors, right? I mean, what a mess here in this country versus other countries. They're doing something far better than we are. But we may have to have you back on again, John, to cover those topics.
Definitely set the table for podcast number 2 with John.
Aren't we forgetting one thing, though?
What's that?
Tequila? Tequila.
Yes. Yes.
We're going to have our tequila. Oh.
I know. Well, I'm just going to chug my Modelo.
All right. Well, here we go. We'll save this for episode 2.
What kind of tequila?
I'm a Milagro fan, man. I keep it simple. I learned from bartenders. There are a few tequilas that are worth keeping on your shelf, and Milagro is one of them.
I noticed you have, is it Dane's Tequila as a sponsor at the Delray Beach
Dano's.
Open? Dano's. Dano's Tequila. We couldn't find it up here. We would have had it. We can't get that in New England, unfortunately. It's not in Northern England. The next podcast, we'll
see if I can get a case and have it sent your way.
Yeah.
Put it in Brian Powell's car.
I'm sure there are other brands that we can be prepped and ready for.
John, thank you so much.
This was awesome. Love it.
Yeah.
Want to see this grow, because this is the type of just open forum chat about this from people who love it and want to see the best for it. You know, this isn't organized or structured. I really love it.
Yeah, and anything we can do to help your cause, man, just let us know. We'll spread the word. This is something I'm very passionate about. It's got to change. It's just such a great sport. So much to unlock.
It's the best in the world for me. Absolutely.
All right,
job, guys.
Well, be good. So, Peter, good to see you. We're down a man this week. Chris just couldn't hang. It's all right. No watch talk, everybody. We'll be picking up watch talk next time with episode 4 when Chris is back.
What do you wish for, right?
Well, since last time, we've had some interesting things happen in the world of tennis. We've got Indian Wells happened, and that was fun for a lot of reasons. One, Nadal withdrew before the event started. We can touch on that in a second. Talk about Netflix Slam. You know, I think obviously Joker losing early to Nardi, this Italian kid who had lost to somebody ranked close to 500 2 weeks prior, and then he beats the world number 1. So just think about the breadth of talent in tennis. 500 to 1, not much delta in talent. It's probably all mental.
What was he ranked?
Nardi was just outside the 100, top 100. I think the biggest story, though, is just Alcaraz is back. He had a slow start in this first round match with Arnaldi and then steamrolled everybody from there. He got certainly some resistance from Sinner in the semis. Got smoked in the first set, actually. Sinner looked like he was otherworldly, and I almost turned it off. But Carlitos came back and closed it out 3-2. And then he just crushed Medvedev in the final. It was 6-1 in the second set. So huge for me to see Alcaraz back, especially right after the ankle.
I think Alcaraz and Sinner are going to see a lot of each other here over the next decade. It's going to be interesting to see how that progresses.
And what's interesting is they like each other. They're friends, right? It's not like they're natural enemies at all. So you need some saucy villains like Djokovic and Medvedev, Zverev to keep it interesting.
Did bees only interrupt Alcaraz's match? Did they resurface with that sort of 120-minute delay and that was it?
It was actually delayed for almost 2 hours. And the big hero was that the guy who was the beekeeper that was, no gloves, no nothing, climbing up there on that stanchion to get the camera that floats over the court is where all the bees were congregating. And he just vacuumed them out of there and then cleaned up the stadium and marched out a hero. So that was pretty wild. But that got a lot of coverage all over, like 60 Minutes and CBS Morning, stuff like that.
ESPN SportsCenter, not top 10, I think.
The not top 10, yeah. And then I tread lightly here, right? But this Sabalenka's boyfriend's suicide, which is what the Miami-Dade police have labeled it, is just a bizarre, sad story that I want to mention. I want to read it into the record here because I think it's going to be a story throughout the year. Just so odd that she's with this guy 1 week in Indian Wells. Next week, she's in Miami. She's not with him. And then he leaps to his death, allegedly.
But he was there with her, right? Supporting her in Miami. So the strange thing to me is, why would he do that there as someone who appears to have the world by the tail, or at least had at one point? I think he played 3 years with the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Yeah.
It's definitely a head scratcher, no doubt about it, and it reeks of foul play. So it will be interesting to see how this develops. But still, awful story. I still can't believe that she went on to play. But, some of these athletes, it's not the first time an athlete has dealt with adversity or sort of a death in the direct or indirect family right before a match. I don't know why Brett Favre comes to mind when his dad passed away the day before his game at the Oakland Raiders, circa 2003. And he had the game of his life the next day. So his sort of therapy was to kind of play through it and, remain distracted, which I'm assuming is Sabalenka's same protocol here, but still strange, top to bottom, the entire story.
Very strange. And then lastly, got to touch on Netflix Slam, which I did attend with my son. It was a nice bucket list event. It was at the Mandalay Bay in the Michelob Ultra Arena, which was kind of a strange place. It was like this 14,000 seat arena in the middle of this casino. Cab driver that took us there had never even heard of it. He'd been driving cabs in Vegas for 30 years. It was literally the longest line I've ever stood in to get into an event. The most serpentine, crazy line. And thank goodness there was no fire because I felt like it was one road in, one road out. But overall, great production. Awesome to see Nadal play. And you could tell they were taking it easy, trying to entertain, as evidenced by him pulling out. He was not feeling it. Came to Indian Wells a couple of days later, which, rubbed people the wrong way. And all the Djokovic fans were pointing at that as an example of Nadal's selfishness. But if those two could meet in the French Open, it would be Game of Thrones level epic.
I wonder, is that going to set the table for future Netflix slam or tennis events, you think?
I think so. They want to do it again, and they should. It was a good production, and I think, unfortunately, Netflix did not recommit to Breakpoint. We talked about this in our last episode with Eric Smallwood. I think Chris called out the fact that 4 million viewers a week or per episode is not probably going to get it done, and sure enough, it didn't. Peter, next time we'll be talking French Open preview. The flowers will be bursting through the frozen soil here in Maine. Hopefully the Red Sox are still relevant. I don't know. They could be done by the time we meet again.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to Breaking Back on your favorite podcast platform. And be sure to follow us on X and Instagram at Breaking Back Pod.